Being the most famous band in the world doesn't really mean everyone loved you. The Beatles are untouchable in pop culture, credited with reshaping modern music. But to some artists, they weren't innovators or geniuses. They were overrated, underwhelming, or worse, musical frauds. These are 7 major musicians who didn't just dislike the Beatles, they called them out. We know that you like to watch our content, yet some of you haven't subscribed yet. Hitting that like and subscribe would cost you nothing more than a second, and it will earn you more fun and deep scoops from the music world. Let's start with number 7, Quincy Jones. You know Michael Jackson's Thriller? Quincy Jones produced it. He was someone who worked with Ray Charles, Frank Sinatra, and Miles Davis. So he knows more than a thing or two about music, especially about what pulled the heartstrings of fans back in the 60s and 70s. This same legend said in a 2018 interview that the Beatles were the worst musicians in the world. He singled out Paul McCartney as a poor bassist and claimed Ringo Starr couldn't keep time in the studio. Jones even said they brought in jazz drummer Bernard Purdie to ghost record parts for Ringo, an unconfirmed but widely discussed rumor in music circles. The Beatles weren't skilled craftsmen to him. They were popular personalities with decent melodies, lifted by strong producers like George Martin. His critique wasn't about ego, it was about standards. Number 6, we have Lou Reed. Have you ever listened to the songs Heroine or Sunday Morning? Then there's a mighty chance you know of Lou Reed, the genius who fronted the Velvet Underground. Back in the early 70s, Reed was totally vibing with the Beatles, praising them as the most incredible songwriters ever, and bummed about their split. But then came 1987 though, and he's throwing shade like it's a TikTok clapback, calling their music garbage and pretentious. So what flipped the switch? Well, Reed was all about that raw, unfiltered rock life. His songs dug into heavy stuff like Addiction, while the Beatles' shiny radio-friendly bops started feeling too basic to him. As punk rose, Lou Reed claimed the Velvet Underground had more edge and authenticity. He dissed the Beatles for going soft, but gave John Lennon's solo work some respect, still insisting his band stayed truer to rock's raw, honest roots. Trent Reznor. Now, here's the man who created 9 Inch Nails, Trent Reznor. He wrote songs like Closer and Hurt, which got so real that Johnny Cash later recorded his own version of Hurt. Back in the 90s, he was building something completely different from what the Beatles did. His music was rough and painful. It sounded like nothing you'd hear on pop radio. So when people kept saying the Beatles were the best band ever, he pushed back. F the Beatles, he said. He felt like everyone around him acted like you had to love them, but to him, their music didn't speak to what he was feeling. At the time, he thought people liked the Beatles just because they were told to. He didn't think that they were deep or edgy. He wanted music that hit hard and told the truth, and the Beatles didn't do that for him. If you're tired of the sugar-coated stuff too, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe. We aren't so polite here. But Trent didn't stay stuck in that opinion. Times do change a man's perspective. Years later, he looked back and admitted that they were way ahead of their time. He started to see how their creative ideas helped shape what came after them. Even if their sound wasn't his thing, he respected how they broke rules and opened doors. That shift showed that sometimes respect just takes time. Glenn Gould. So Glenn Gould, well, he wasn't exactly a rock star. He was a classical pianist from Canada, known for his recordings of Johann Sebastian Bach. His 1955 version of the Goldberg Variations changed how people heard classical music. He was shy, wore gloves even indoors, and often hummed while playing. But when he spoke, people in music circles listened. Gould didn't care for pop music, and when he came to the Beatles, he was openly dismissive. He once said their songs were built on 3-chord tricks and basic structures. To him, it didn't matter how many people loved them. What mattered was the music itself. It just wasn't that deep. He measured music by how it was built. He loved complex structures, interwoven melodies, and harmonic innovation. He studied the works of Bach, Schoenberg, and other serious composers. He saw music as architecture. Every note had to earn its place. So when he looked at Beatles songs built on blues patterns and catchy hooks, he found them simple, maybe charming, but not masterful. Gould also believed that much of their acclaim came from hype and timing. They arrived when the world was ready for something new, but he didn't think that that made them great composers. For him, real music demanded more effort, more craft, and a deeper understanding of form. He wasn't trying to be edgy, he was just being honest. And in his eyes, calling the Beatles musical geniuses was a stretch. To him, they were entertainers. not artists in the classical sense. But everyone's entitled to their own opinion, right? 3. Ray Davies. Alright, so the Beatles were so popular back in the day that it attracted heavy criticism from another revolutionary icon, Ray Davies. Yup, the guy who led the Kinks, one of the biggest bands to come out of the UK in the 1960s. They were part of the same wave of British rock as the Beatles. While the Beatles were making headlines around the world, Davies was quietly pushing boundaries with songs like You Really Got Me and Lola. Davies wasn't someone speaking from the sidelines. He was right there in it, watching the Beatles up close. He saw how nearly everything they released was met with praise. Meanwhile, bands like the Kinks, who were taking creative risks, often got less attention. He once called their 1966 album, Revolver, rubbish, and suggested that even the Beatles knew it wasn't their best work. He pointed out that the Kinks were doing experimental things before it became popular. They were playing with distortion, narrative songwriting, and even early forms of the concept album. Yet the Beatles often got credit for ideas other bands had explored first. Davies didn't deny the Beatles' talent, but what bothered him was how critics and fans often acted like the Beatles were the only ones doing anything new. 2. Charles Mingus. Another guy who had somewhat of the same attitude but in a much different, larger sense was one of jazz's strongest visionaries, Charles Mingus. Dude was a jazz legend, a beast on the bass, and way ahead of his time. He wasn't afraid to confront racism in the music industry. In fact, he was more confident than most to come forward and call out the BS he thought was going on in said industry. To give you a little background, Mingus was a bassist and composer behind albums like Mingus and he accused the Beatles of appropriating black music, borrowing heavily from the blues and rock and roll traditions without proper acknowledgement. To him, the Beatles were the poster boys for a system that kept handing out awards to the remix while ignoring the original. They dipped in the blues and rock and roll, genres rooted in black culture, then served it up in a neat little package that white audiences and record labels could eat up, without any of the credit going back to where it came from. Honestly, that's a strong reason for that hate, don't you think? And 1. Freddie Mercury. And finally, we take a closer look at one of rock's most energetic and theatrical frontmen, Freddie Mercury of Queen, and what he had to say about the Beatles, or maybe just their core. The trouble started in 1976. Both Queen and McCartney's band, Wings, was making music at the same place in London called Air Studios. A man who worked there, Mike Stone, said that Freddie thought Paul's music was too boring and not exciting enough. Freddie would sing Paul's song Silly Love Songs in a funny way to make fun of him when Paul was nearby. This wasn't just a joke. It showed that Freddie really didn't like Paul's music. In 1977, at a big music awards show in Britain, Freddie didn't want to sit with Paul. He told his manager, "I don't want to watch Paul get awards for his simple music that he thinks is rock and roll." When Paul won an award for his album Band on the Run, Freddie rolled his eyes so much that it was like he was acting on stage. In 1978, Freddie talked to a music magazine called Melody Maker. He said Paul doesn't remember what rock music is supposed to be. While he sings about simple things like writers, we are making it big, new songs that sound like opera, it's very different. This wasn't just Freddie being mean to Paul. He thought the Beatles' music was too perfect and made to sell a lot, but it didn't have the strong, real feeling that rock music should have. The problem got really bad at a big concert called Live Aid in 1985. Freddie said no one should play after Queen, and he made sure that Queen's show was special and separate. Queen's performance was amazing, and people still talk about it, but Paul's show had some problems with the equipment. After that, Freddie told his friend Roger Taylor, "That's what makes us leaders and followers." In plain terms, Freddie couldn't stand the Beatles playing it easy with the rock. Which musician do you think had the most valid reason to hate the Beatles? Drop it in the comments. And of course, don't forget to like and share. And if you thought that this was wild, wait until you see the 10 forgotten 80 bands that absolutely despised each other. So subscribe now so you don't miss it.